Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to Hilaal Live. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us. I'd also like to thank my colleague Luqman Shadrack for taking you through that first part of the show. Now, Human Rights Watch has said that the Israeli government has failed to comply with at least one measure in the legally binding order from the International Court of Justice in South Africa's genocide case, citing warnings about catastrophic conditions in Gaza. The court ordered on January the 26th that Israel must take immediate and effective measures to enable the provisions of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian aid, and to report back on its compliance to the specific measures within 1 month. Joining me now from the HRW in the UK, I'd like to welcome Yasmine Ahmed. Yasmine, good day. Thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live.
Thank you for having me.
Yasmine, 1 month into it, of course, Israel submitted their part to the ICJ, but it just feels as if it was a half-hearted measure, wasn't it? Because within that month, really, there was no real plausible evidence that they were following the measures that were implied by the ICJ.
Yes, well, in fact, as you noted, Human Rights Watch has come out very clearly and said that Israel is in clear breach of at least one of the orders issued by the International Court of Justice, namely the order to ensure that this basic humanitarian provision and aid gets into Gaza. What we do know is that, in fact, in the month after the provisional measure is made, there is less aid that is allowed into Gaza than in the weeks prior. And there is less humanitarian provision and mission allowed into the north of Gaza than was previous to that. And we know that the situation in Gaza is catastrophic in terms of starvation, and in fact is only getting worse. It also is obviously coupled with allegations that there have been attacks on humanitarian convoys. And we know, obviously, that there have been a significant number of fatalities among those who are providing humanitarian provision. So we remain very, very concerned. And I know, obviously, this concern is echoed by a number of governments and by the UN.
Yasmine, I want to talk about yesterday the United Nations, the World Food Programme, and various organs within the UN have mentioned that famine is potentially looming in Gaza. That's because food aid trucks, are being totally denied entry into Gaza via Rafah. That's concerning, isn't it? Because that just speaks to the fact that Israel, again, just not seem to adhere to any of the measures which the ICJ had asked them to comply with.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Human Rights Watch has been very clear, in fact, from the beginning of this current hostilities, that Israel is, in fact, collectively punishing the entire Palestinian population in Gaza by withholding and stopping humanitarian aid from getting in other than a trickle. We've also been very clear that Israel has been using starvation as a method of warfare against the Palestinian people. And as you know, we remain very, very concerned that rather than the situation getting better, in fact, it is getting much, much worse. We are seeing reports of, and we know, in fact, that Palestinians are not in Gaza, are not eating for at least a day. We know people have have reportedly had to eat animal food, and we know that the health issues that will follow on for this, particularly for children in Gaza, will be incredibly significant. So yes, what Israel is doing is a war crime. Yes, they are acting in breach of the International Court of Justice's order. And it is critical now that states, including the US, the UK, and other states, take measures immediately, including sanctions, to ensure that Israel stops imposing what is a man-made humanitarian catastrophe on the people of Gaza.
Yasmine, I want to talk about the doctors because last week representatives of Doctors Without Borders mentioned that it's basically impossible for any foreign doctors or even doctors within Gaza to really operate and help those who have been injured within that part of Palestine. And then, of course, moving to Rafah, where I'm going to touch on that in a bit, where it's seemingly getting quite worse there also. From a medical perspective, that's even more concerning, isn't it? Given that when a basic human right like the access to medical facilities are being denied, that raises an even bigger concern.
Yes, I think you're quite right. Human Rights Watch has documented attacks and failure to comply with IHL principles in relation to hospitals. We know that the number of functioning hospitals in Gaza is incredibly low. We know that because of the lack of humanitarian provision, key medicine, including anaesthetic, but also including insulin and other such things, are not getting into Gaza. So there obviously have been reports of children, amputees, who have had to undergo operations without anaesthetic. The situation is dire. The facilities to actually help them and provide for them is getting worse and worse. So yes, the provision of healthcare for people in Gaza, both those that are directly impacted by the hostilities and by the attacks from Israel, as well as those who just need medical care in Gaza, are not able to get what they should because the medical facilities have been, many of them, in fact, have been destroyed or disabled from being able to operate. And there is just not the medicine that is needed to be able to effectively treat people as well.
Yasmine, Benjamin Netanyahu has said that he doesn't see any chance of a potential ceasefire. He wants to continue this aggression, and now he's set his sights on Rafah, where 2 or 2 even 3 million residents of Gaza are currently at the moment. That's now concerning even more, isn't it, given that this ground invasion seems to be a reality rather than just lip service?
Yeah, we as Human Rights Watch are very, very concerned about the possibility of a ground invasion, particularly given the very, very real risk of forcible displacement of the Palestinian people. As you noted, a majority of those Palestinian people in Gaza are now in Rafah, an area that is extremely small and prior to the conflict held about 300,000 people. There are over 1 million Palestinians who are living in makeshift shelters in Rafah. And we know that there have been areas within Rafah which were designated as safe zones, which have also been attacked by Israel. So we remain very, very concerned about what may happen should, in fact, this ground invasion go forward. And we are calling really as strongly as we possibly can to states to make sure that they are putting the pressure on Israel that they need to make sure that this does not go forward, that there is not forcible displacement, and that there is not further breaches of international humanitarian law in a place which is so densely populated.
Yasmine, you spoke about sanctions. Obviously, the country you live in, the United Kingdom, they're very far from that happening. They're actually more closer to supplying more weapons to Israel. I mean, if you listen to what British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is saying. But across the British Isles, there's Ireland who are looking at the potential sanctions that could happen. How much pressure is there from civil servants within the United Kingdom? Of course, we see, through various media outlets, protests that are occurring within the United Kingdom. But the pressure from civil service for Rishi Sunak to at least call for a ceasefire and for there to be some sort of moral high ground from the United Kingdom government if that has to happen, because we saw last week during the parliamentary debate that many of the opposition were really throwing it at Rishi Sunak for him to take a tougher stance against Israel. Talk to us about, on the ground within the United Kingdom, what is happening for there to be some sort of pressure against the United Kingdom government.
Yes, well, as you note, very, very correctly, the UK government is far from taking the positions that we would want it to take. And in fact, as you note, they are supplying military equipment that eventually is used in Gaza. And in fact, the UK government has admitted that there are a number of export licenses for equipment that is likely to be used in Gaza. And yet, unlike in other situations where the UK government has said that they would suspend, they have refused to date to suspend export licenses of military equipment to Israel. So you're quite right, and we are calling on the UK government, and we are in fact obviously watching with very great interest the legal cases which are being brought to challenge this. We do know that there was a legal case in the Netherlands which was successful, which means that the Netherlands can no longer provide military equipment or license military equipment to Israel. We also know there are a number of states, including Italy, the Netherlands, and others, well, obviously the Netherlands, but Italy and others, who have voluntarily, without a court order, said that they will stop licensing military equipment to Israel. In terms of what's happening on the ground in the UK, we have had a significant mobilisation of pressure by the public, which has been borne out on political parties to say that stronger action needs to be taken to ensure that the lives of Palestinians are protected and are not put in jeopardy by the actions of Israel. We've seen parliamentarians being very strong on this, including the Scottish National Party, the Greens, and other parties. Labor has, in fact, been strong on some of the issues, but we would say it needs to be stronger. In terms of what the civil service has been saying and doing, early on in the conflict, there were a number of current serving diplomats who did sign a letter which said that the UK government needs to act with neutrality in relation to both what's happening by Hamas as well as with Israel, and not take any and not be acting with any preference to either side, and to be speaking out robustly to protect the international rule of law and international human rights law and humanitarian law.
Yes,
So what we have in the UK at the moment is a clear picture of the public and parliamentarians putting pressure on the government.
Yasmine, always a pleasure having you on Hilaal Live. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Yasmine Ahmed from the Human Rights Watch in the United Kingdom. Do stay tuned to Hilaal Live. We'll be back after this break.